Hey guys, before we get on with the video, I just want to address sort of an elephant in the room that's been actually a little over a month since my last video. Sorry about that. I don't know any other way to say it except I kind of hit sort of a lull where I really wasn't reading and wasn't really doing anything with the channel. I don't know what it was, but I'm back on it, and the book we're reviewing is Jaws by Peter Benchley. This is my copy, and here is Jeremy's copy. Or technically, isn't that a library copy?
Well, it's, I got it at the Patchogue Library. I had to interlibrary loan request it.
Now, I did review this book actually over 10 years ago. I just wanted to redo the review. The older review is still up, however, it's no longer public. It's now marked as unlisted, but you can still see it with a link, which I'll leave in the description below. Now, Jaws was published in 1974. Now, Peter Benchley is the author of books like Shark Trouble, The Deep, White Shark, and Beast. And this book was famously adapted into the Steven Spielberg film of the same name. What did you think of the book, Jaws?
I think it's a pretty good book. You know, it's got a lot of great... it's very tense throughout, and I just love the way Peter Benchley describes the shark attacks. They're perfectly terrifying.
Yeah. Oh yeah, especially the opening scene is just like, it's so gruesome the way it's described, and honestly pretty terrifying.
I've actually, I once saw this illustration of that scene from the book, Chrissy's Death, and that was a pretty good representation of it, I think. I could just picture... I just love how he said, you know, the shark sensed prey. It doesn't take her in its mouth at first. At first it bites off her foot.
Yeah.
You know, that's also terrifying, you know, when she says she felt for her foot, but, you know, didn't feel it there.
That's a pretty gruesome depiction. Yeah. So, since I always describe the plot of these books, want to explain the plot of Jaws?
Yeah, sure, I'll be happy to. So, the plot of Jaws is a great white shark kills several swimmers off the beaches of a small coastal town on Long Island called Amity. The town's police chief, Martin Brody, tries to close the beaches, but is met with resistance from the politicians in the town when it appears that the shark might have moved on. Soon it becomes clear, however, that the shark is still stalking the beaches, and the story culminates in Brody, along with a marine biologist named Matt Hooper and a fisherman named Quint, setting out to hunt down the shark and put a stop to it once and for all.
Yeah, so what do you think of, like, some of the characters in the novel? Because, of course, the characters in the book are much different than their movie counterparts. Also, if you've only seen the movie and have never read the book, you might be surprised that there's a lot of subplots in the book, and a lot of the book is almost more of a melodrama about small-town life that just happens to feature a shark as one of the plot lines. Like, the shark plot line almost, like, ties all these different subplots together. Now, when I first read the book 10 years ago, I actually really liked the subplots, because I had never read the book at that point, but I'd seen the movie a million times, and it was almost like I was getting an alternate version of this story, and I liked it when I first read it, but reading the book again, honestly, like, a lot of the subplots came off as more soap opera-y, I guess you could say, like something you would see in a soap opera rather than like realistic drama.
Well, I mean, I first read the book when I was 12, and you know, at that young age, you know, I'd seen the movie God knows how many times at that point, so I was surprised by all the differences in the book. But you know, being 12, there were some things I didn't understand. You know, I didn't understand the whole subplot of the mayor being involved with the mafia. You know, I didn't understand, I guess, some of the adult language in it.
Yeah.
You know, but for the most part, I still enjoyed it. But yeah, I was shocked by the amount of differences, especially, as we'll get to later, some of the deaths.
What did you think of, like, the subplot of the mayor being in debt to the mob? Like, I guess on some level you could say technically gives him more of a motivation for wanting to keep the beaches open than what's presented in the film. at the same time, I don't think the movie would be as good if they kept that subplot in. So.
I mean, I think having him involved with the mafia just makes him even more of a scumbag.
Yeah.
Just because it's like, you know these guys are up to no good, and yet you're getting involved with them. Plus, the book also contains a scene where it contains several scenes, but the first scene we see him in, he's threatening Brody's job if Brody closes down the beaches, which the mayor in the movie is kind of a scumbag too, but he never outright threatens Brody's job.
Yeah.
He also, in the books, has a line where he says, Martin, maybe we're just over-exaggerating this a little bit, and this is after several people have been killed by the shark.
Yeah, the mayor's definitely more of a scumbag in the novel.
It should also be mentioned that the town of Amity seems to have a history of covering up horrific events that occur in the town. In the beginning of the novel, Peter Benchley describes how there once was a serial rapist running loose, but that the town covered it up because if news of that got out, it wouldn't make Amity a very desirable place to be.
I'm gonna say it, I actually think most of the characters in the book are kind of unlikable. Especially Matt Hooper. Matt Hooper's kind of a douchebag in the book.
He's an absolute prick. He's this young, cocky, smartass. He and Brody are constantly at odds, right up to when they first meet.
Now, I do want to point out that there's sort of a theme of classism in the book, how Brody's wife, Ellen, she came from the upper class, and Brody came from the more middle to lower class, and even though she loves Brody, there is this sense that she sort of resents him because he kind of took her away from that lifestyle, from that world, and in the novel, you find out that she actually dated Matt Hooper's older brother, and there's a scene in the book where, let's just say, Matt Hooper and Brody's wife get jiggy with it.
Oh, let's just outright say it. They fuck. No, but I don't think we should try to dress it up. Yeah, they have an affair. But, about her missing her old life, yeah, at this point, she's probably middle-aged. She has a few kids. She's bored with her life. And that's what's making her miss the old life where she was in the upper class and hung around with some, I guess you could say, classier people.
Yeah. And then there's the sense that, Brody kind of resents Ellen because she came from that world, and there's this sense, and this kind of makes Brody a little unlikable, this sense that he kind of enjoys the fact that he took this, upper-class woman down to his level. So I would say a lot of the characters in the book are kind of pricks.
I mean, I personally never saw that part with Brody, but, he does actually come off as a prick during the dinner party, when he gives Ellen a hard time about the
lamb shanks?
Yeah, he's like, oh, I'm not eating that raw, and she's like, this is how it's supposed to be served, and it's like, dude, she's the one who planned the dinner party and planned the dinner.
Yeah, he was a real asshole in that scene.
Prepare the damn dinner.
Part where you get the sense of the classism angle is honestly with Brody and Hooper's relationship, how Hooper is sort of upper class, and you could tell that Brody has sort of a resentment or sort of a jealousy of Hooper in that regard, and even with Hooper's relationship with Captain Quint, you get that sense as well.
Yeah, that becomes especially evident when Hooper discovers the dead baby porpoise on Quint's boat and, gets all self-righteous and says, how could you do this? This is illegal. They're an endangered species. And Quint says, you know what? I gotta feed myself and make a living. You don't understand what that's like.
To be fair, though, I was kind of on Hooper's side in that scene just because what Quint did was basically poaching, and that's not cool. Although, that is a good point you could make, though, is that, look, he's somebody who needs to make a living. And
not even just with the porpoise, though. The entire novel, he gives off this sort of aura, this attitude that just screams, I'm better than you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it gets so bad to the point where Brody at one point tries to strangle him on the dock.
Well, Brody also tries to strangle him because even though he never officially finds out, you get a sense that Brody knows that this guy fucked his wife.
Yeah, true. Although, like I said, even before he had his suspicions about that, he still didn't like him.
Another theme you see in the novel is man's powerlessness against nature. We think we can conquer nature, we think we understand nature, but sometimes, like, when we try to overstep our bounds with nature, nature puts us in our place, basically, and I think that's sort of a theme you see in the novel with these men going up against the shark and realizing that they're, like, outmatched by it.
They keep getting, shall we say, outwitted by this shark time and time again.
Yeah.
And, you said before that it's almost like the shark is fucking with them. It's toying with them.
And obviously it couldn't be because it's just an animal, but there is sort of that sense you get, or at least that's something that Brody starts to feel about the creature, but then again, that could just be Brody projecting his own views of the creature onto it, when in reality it's just an animal. Yeah,
although there are several points where Brody swears he could see that shark grinning at them. Obviously the shark isn't intentionally grinning at them and mocking them, but from where Brody is looking at it and in his mindset, having put up with the trouble this shark has caused for so long, it might as well have just been grinning at him, It's like he's gonna see that. It's his enemy.
And I think it's interesting how you get, like, each of the three men have different views of a shark. Like, Quint sees the shark as something to be conquered, something to be hunted. Brody sees the shark as something evil, whereas Matt Hooper almost, like, is in awe of the shark, is almost worshipping the shark in a way. So I thought that was a really interesting angle in the story as well.
I like how Matt Hooper, when he first sees the shark, is just so in awe. It's almost like he forgets the danger of it, and he does pretty much forget the danger when he stupidly goes into the cage to take pictures of it and also try to kill it. But, it's like you get the sense that he really just wants to get the pictures more than kill it. Just because he wants to show it to all his scientific buddies in the community and probably get famous.
And there's also, it's not outright, it's not like really supernatural, but there's almost this subtle undercurrent of the supernatural, almost as if this shark is an act of God in a way, or, like Hooper even says at one point that sharks are the one thing that could make him believe that there could potentially be a god.
Yeah, and there's also this religious fanatic in Amity who, says that shark is just God's way of punishing us all. There are many terrifying scenes in this book, one of which haunted me from the first time I read it when I was 12 years old, as a boy narrowly escaping the shark. I mean, just the way Benchley describes the shark being inches away from him in the water, that got to me. It really did. And even though the boy escapes, it's definitely one of those just too close for comfort moments. And although it is also offset by that nosy reporter trying to get footage of it, and then shoving a microphone in Brody's face, and also the tourist guy and his family.
Yeah, that guy was a real prick.
Yeah, Brody, he puts up with a lot in this book. In fact, even when he is being a prick during the dinner party, I sort of felt sorry for him because of that, what's her name, Daisy Wicker woman, was kind of giving him some sarcastic lip, and I'm like, that's just not called for. Brody, I'd say he's probably the most likable main character in the book, just because, he does try to do the right thing. He does, have a moral compass, if you will. And, he mostly drives the story.
Yeah. He's definitely the protagonist of the novel.
Yeah.
Harry Meadows is the overweight, cigar-smoking editor of the local Amity newspaper, and he plays a prominent role in the story. He uses his position as the editor of the local Amity newspaper to hush up the news of the first shark attack, and also is against Brody closing the beaches. Now, at first he seems friendly with Brody, but then later gangs up on him along with the mayor and Matt Hooper in an argument on whether or not to close the beaches. However, he does have a moment of redemption towards the end of the novel, when he realizes his mistake and prints a very favorable article about Brody and how he tried to keep the beaches closed, which was a nice way to give him some character development.
I just thought that maybe a good example of showing you just how terrifying some of these shark attack scenes are would be to read one of them for you right here and right now. The fish did not hear the sound, but rather registered the sharp and jerky impulses emitted by the kicks. They were signals, faint but true, and the fish locked on them, homing. It rose, slowly at first, then gaining speed as the signals grew stronger. The boy stopped for a moment to rest. The signals ceased. The fish slowed, turning its head from side to side, trying to recover them. The boy lay perfectly still, and the fish passed beneath him, skimming the sandy bottom. Again it turned. The boy resumed paddling. He kicked only every third or fourth stroke. Kicking was more exertion than steady paddling, but the occasional kicks sent new signals to the fish. This time, it needed to lock on them only an instant, for it was almost directly below the boy. The fish rose, nearly vertical. It now saw the commotion on the surface. There was no conviction that what thrashed above was food, but food was not a concept of significance. The fish was impelled to attack. If what it swallowed was digestible, that was food. If not, it would later be regurgitated. The mouth opened, and with a final sweep of the sickle tail, the fish struck. The boy's last, only thought was that he had been punched in the stomach. The breath was driven from him in a sudden rush. He had no time to cry out, nor had he the time would he have known what to cry, for he could not see the fish. The fish's head drove the raft out of the water. The jaws smashed together, engulfing head, arms, shoulders, trunk, pelvis, and most of the raft. Nearly half the fish had come clear of the water, and it slid forward and down in a belly-flopping motion, grinding the mass of flesh and bone and rubber. The boy's legs were severed at the hips, and they sank, spinning slowly, to the bottom.
Any closing thoughts on Jaws, the novel?
Well, I like it very much. I do think the movie is better, but I still loved rereading the book recently. You know, it just reminds us that we may never truly know what could be lurking beneath as we take our joyous swims.
Yeah, that's actually something I wanted to bring up about the novel, because I go swimming a lot, and even when I'm swimming in, like, you know, the bay or in a lake, I always get that feeling, what if there is something below the surface of this water? Yeah. And that's always haunted me, because, like, when you're in a body of water, you're in their territory.
I used to, when I was a kid, I went to a camp with a big dark lake that we'd all go into, and I was always terrified that there were sharks there, even though they'd say it's a lake, it's not the ocean, and I'd be like, bull sharks can enter lakes.
Yeah, there are species of sharks that could enter fresh water. I think bull sharks, and I heard one other species apparently can go into fresh water, but don't ask me what that other species is.
Well, apparently they're actually thinking that occasionally great whites can if the salinity of the water is high enough. But that's, you know, I'm no expert on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, you know, the Jersey Shore attacks of 1916, I think one of those attacks took place in a creek.
Yeah, but weren't those specifically bull sharks, though?
They think they were, but other people have casted doubts, but again,
okay.
I'm no expert.
Not just sharks, but crocodiles and alligators freak me out, too. Yeah. Like, you know, the idea that those could be lurking right below the water as you're swimming. But yeah, Jaws is a very good book. I don't think it's a perfect novel by any means, but it's a book I do recommend. If you are a fan of the movie, I recommend giving the novel a read. It is quite different. Honestly, the movie and the book Jaws are two completely different animals, but it is, you know, it's a decent book, and if you want to see where the movie came from, you should give the novel a read. But yeah, I recommend it.
Me too.
Hey guys, first of all, sorry about the dramatic change in lighting. We recorded the first half of this video last night, and Then we went to bed. Jeremy slept in his bed. I slept under his bed. And now we're recording the rest of the video where we'll be talking about the 1975 film adaptation of Jaws, directed by Steven Spielberg. While it was not Spielberg's first movie, it was definitely the movie that sort of made Spielberg what we know him as today. Like, if it wasn't for Jaws, who's to say if we would have stuff like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, E.T., Jurassic Park, or even Schindler's List? Like, it's hard to say if he would have that career if not for this movie.
That's right. This movie put him on the map.
Steven Spielberg has said that he considers Jaws to be almost like a spiritual follow-up to his 1971 film Duel, whereas Duel is a film about man versus machine. Jaws is a film about man versus nature. Now, as we alluded to when we were talking about the book, the movie Jaws changes almost everything from the novel, and you know what? It's a better movie for it. While Jaws was a pretty good book, the movie is a fucking masterpiece. And Jaws is a film that really did sort of change movies at the time. Like, both Jaws and George Lucas's Star Wars, which came out 2 years later, are considered the films that sort of created the summer blockbuster. What do you think of Jaws, the 1975 masterpiece?
It's an amazing movie. It's one of my favorite movies, and it's one that I consider to be one of the greatest movies of all time. And, you know, without it, we probably wouldn't have a lot of the blockbusters that we do today.
All the subplots in the book of, like, you know, the mayor being involved with the mafia and all that other stuff, it worked well in the book, but it would not have been as good of a movie if they kept all those subplots.
Yeah. Especially the subplot about the affair between Ellen and Matt Hooper.
And that's one thing I gotta say, is the characters in the movie are so much more likable. In fact, the movie Jaws has some of the most likable characters you'll see in any movie.
Oh yeah, you root for them right from the start, Chief Brody especially.
Yeah, played by the great Roy Scheider.
Yes, and Matt Hooper is so much more sympathetic in the movie.
Even Quint is slightly more likable than he is in the book.
Yeah.
I mean, Quint's still an asshole, but you get a little more insight into his character, I think, in the movie, because the movie adds the whole thing of him being a World War II veteran. I mean, he was a veteran in the book, but in the movie they add the whole detail of him being on the USS Indianapolis, which was a ship sunk by the Japanese at the end of World War II, and famously, like, a lot of men survived it, the initial sink-in, but were out at sea, and sharks attacked them.
Yeah, that's right, and that speech is quite haunting, especially when he tells the part of, bumping into his friend Herbie Robinson, baseball player. He'd been bitten below the waist.
Robert Shaw did such a great job in the movie.
He should have gotten an Oscar nomination for that.
And Richard Dreyfuss is also really good as Matt Hooper. And you've met Richard Dreyfuss a few times, right?
Yes, I have. I met him twice. The first time was at Chiller Theater, my first convention, Chiller Theater, in October of 2009. I asked him what the hardest thing about filming Jaws was, and he said, waiting. There would be a guy with a megaphone running all around the island saying, "The shark is not working. The shark is not working." And, he put his hands on his mouth and imitated the sound of someone speaking through a megaphone while he told me that. I also asked him what working with Robert Shaw was like, and he told me that he had the biggest personality. And then one of the guys working at his table said that he was more afraid of him than the shark. I also asked what working with Roy Scheider was like, and he said that he was a sweetheart, and then about Steven Spielberg, to which he gave me an OK sign with his fingers. Yeah, he was very nice. And the second time I met him was at Monster Mania in 2018. I asked if it was scary to see Bruce the shark up close. He told me that it wasn't. And that was the problem, and he called it a fat, stupid doll. He also told me about how Steven Spielberg had to change his entire vision and make a movie that he didn't originally set out to make.
And that's something I want to bring up about the movie Jaws, is it's almost an accident that the movie turned out as good as it did, because for all intents and purposes, the production of this film was basically a disaster.
Oh yeah, it had everything working against it, especially, They filmed it out on the open ocean where the weather could constantly change. There were people vacationing in sailboats. They couldn't have that in the shots, but the people refused to leave. They also, and of course the biggest problem was the malfunctioning Bruce, or Bruces. There were, I think, 3 of them.
But you know what? Like, because of those accidents, some of it actually improved the movie, because from what I understand, Spielberg originally set out to make more of a B-movie. Like, you were going to see the shark a lot more often, and the fact that the shark wasn't working forced them to kind of go a little more psychological with it, where you don't see the shark in the beginning, and that's one of the reasons why the movie works so well.
Yeah, he decided to really more suggest the shark's presence, rather than just show it outright because of the malfunctioning shark. In his original storyboards, though, you saw much more shark. You saw it devour Chrissy Watkins. You saw it devour Alex Kintner, They actually did get a shot of the shark coming up out of the water and devouring Alex Kintner. They managed to get it after the shark finally worked, but I think they decided not to use it because Universal felt it was too horrifying, and also because they wanted to save the reveal of the shark for later.
And another thing that works so much about Jaws is the real human drama in it. And sure, there's drama in the novel, but in the novel it's more melodrama and more like something you'll see in a soap opera, whereas the human drama in the film feels more believable. One of the most moving scenes in the movie Jaws is when it's after the mother of Alex Kintner confronts Brody, and Brody's feeling a lot of guilt that he couldn't close the beaches in time to save Alex, and he's just sitting at his kitchen table looking all depressed, but then his son is there mimicking all of his moves, and it's such a touching scene.
Yes, it is. Very touching scene. And then, of course, it's followed by Hooper inviting himself to dinner, which I must say is quite rude, especially when he asks, is anyone eating this? What other character I liked? The character of Hendrix, played by Jeffrey Kramer.
Yeah,
he's pretty good. I wish they had used him a little more. I met Jeffrey Kramer as well. He was very nice, told me a lot of good information.
Jeremy, and I'm a big Jaws fan.
I have a son named Jeremy.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Kramer. Really? Well, I'm Jeremy Schwartz.
Jeremy Schwartz. Tell me something. How come you love Jaws? Is it because of your folks?
No, it's
you were like 3 when they showed it to you, right?
Well, I mean, I used to love sharks a lot. As a kid, I liked all kinds of animals, so naturally I got into this movie, and I've been hooked ever since.
I get it. Which one do you want? This is my favorite, by the way. I love this one.
I think
it makes me smile.
Really? I think I'll take this one right here.
All right.
And I'd like to ask, what was working with Roy Scheider like?
In Jaws 1, it was good. In Jaws 2, it was tough.
Really?
Yeah. Oh. He didn't want to do it.
Yeah, I read he only did it because of a contract dispute with Universal.
Yeah. Would you like Rachel to take it?
Yeah, sure. Oh, and did you ever meet Robert Shaw, even though you didn't?
I did. He was a character.
Really?
What a great actor.
I mean, the whole cast was great in that movie. Murray Hamilton, he definitely played his part well. The kind of sleazy mayor, trying to...
But like we said, he is slightly more likable in the movie than he is in the book.
Yeah, he is, because during the hospital scene, where he's clearly all shook up, you can tell he feels a lot of guilt for what he's done.
Harry Meadows is portrayed by Carl Gottlieb and is still the editor of the local Amity newspaper, but his role in the story is greatly reduced. Carl Gottlieb also co-wrote the script, and I remember hearing him say that reducing the role of Harry Meadows was the best thing he did as a writer, but the worst thing he did as an actor. In the movie, he's in a few scenes and has some lines, but he's not nearly as prominent as he is in the novel. Reducing Harry Meadows' part in the story was just something that the filmmakers had to do. I had the pleasure of meeting Carl Gottlieb at a screening of Jaws back in 2019. He was very nice and told me all about how Richard Dreyfuss threw Robert Shaw's shot glass into the water and how that really pissed Shaw off. I got him to sign a copy of his book, a photo, and my Jaws poster that I had already gotten signed by Richard Dreyfuss.
Yeah, and I think Jaws is just one of those perfect movies because, it almost has something for everybody. It's a horror film, it's an action-adventure film, it's a drama film, but there's also a lot of humor in the film.
Although, I must say, there is one thing I wish they'd kept from the book. I wish they'd kept the scene where the boy narrowly escapes the shark. That was an intense scene. I think the book did perfectly.
I think they kind of played on that a little bit, like when those two guys are out trying to catch the shark and the dock breaks and one of them just manages to escape. Like, I think that scene was meant to be somewhat of an analog to the scene of the boy escaping the shark in the book.
Music in that particular scene is just fantastic. It's suitably terrifying.
Oh yeah, how can you not mention the music in Jaws?
By John Williams.
Yeah, just one of those iconic scores that even people who have never seen Jaws, the minute you go dun 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 like that, everybody knows that. And Jaws is one of those movies that's become just a huge and almost integral part of the American pop culture lexicon.
Absolutely. It's a pop culture phenomenon. It's one of those movies that has stood the test of time and will continue to do so in the years that come.
Yeah, the movie, like we said, it changes so much from the book, but to me it's a prime example of how an adaptation doesn't always have to follow a novel to a T in order to be good.
Correct.
And I do call bullshit on the whole, the book is always better. Yeah. First of all, movies and books are two completely different forms of medium. They're two completely different ways of telling a story, so I don't like saying one's better than the other, but I think Jaws, though, if you're gonna make that argument, Jaws is a good example of how that's not always true, the book always being better, you know?
Yeah, I agree.
Now, while the book was set on Long Island, in the movie it's a little more ambiguous as to where Amity is supposed to be, but in the movie, Amity is its own island, and in real life, the movie was shot at Martha's Vineyard, which is a small island off the coast of Massachusetts. Now, as Jeremy and I had alluded to before, Jaws became the first real summer blockbuster, and while Spielberg and Universal were certainly hoping for a hit, I don't think they ever could have predicted how much of a phenomenon Jaws would become. Jaws really did affect not just pop culture, but American culture in general. Movies were not the same after Jaws, and there have been so many books and documentaries made about the making of Jaws. But Jaws, while it did not need to have sequels, did spawn a small franchise. In 1978, you had Jaws 2, which I actually like Jaws 2 for what it is. It's much more of a B-movie, whereas the first one, I think, was a lot more sophisticated. Jaws 2 feels more like the B-movie I think Spielberg was originally setting out to make with the first one. But I like it. It actually almost feels like a slasher film to me, especially towards the end, where some of the teenage characters that the shark starts going after feel like characters right out of a Friday the 13th movie, and it came out 2 years before the first Friday the 13th. Yeah. But what do you think of Jaws 2?
It's a decent sequel. It doesn't even come close to the original, but I think it's alright, you know. The shark is awarded more screen time, which does take away some of the suspense, but, you know, I guess it's fun to see the shark, too. And, you know, it's nice to have Roy Scheider back, even though he really didn't want to do it. In fact, he only agreed to do the movie to settle a contract dispute with Universal. He was supposed to be, I think he had a 3-picture deal with them, and he was supposed to be in The Deer Hunter, but left that movie over creative differences, which I heard he later came to regret. And Universal was so angry, I think they threatened legal action, but then said if he agreed to star in Jaws 2, they would count that as the rest of the movies on his contract, so he reluctantly agreed, and oh god, he fought with the director constantly. It was not a happy set.
Well, I also heard that they changed directors. Like, it was originally directed by one guy, and apparently the original storyline for Jaws 2 was going to be much darker, and it was going to be more so about the town falling into complete economic despair, and like it was going to take some stuff from the book of the mayor being in debt to the mob, and it was going to be a much more grim movie from what I heard. And I think they actually shot a lot of that, but like halfway through they fired the original director and replaced him with someone else, and that's what really pissed off Roy Scheider.
Yeah, I think the original director was named John D. Hancock.
Yes, I believe so.
The director they eventually went with, he has a bit of a hard-to-pronounce name. Jean Schwark, I think it is. It's French.
Yeah, he also directed the movie Bug, if you ever saw that. It was
I've never seen that.
Killer cockroach movie from like 2 years earlier.
But yeah, he and Roy Scheider were constantly butting heads, and I think eventually they got into a fist fight, which had to be broken up. And you also have Jeffrey Kramer back as Deputy Hendricks. You have Murray Hamilton back as Mayor Vaughn. You have Lorraine Gary back as Ellen Brody. So, you get some of the returning cast, which is nice.
Yeah, there is a scene I really like in Jaws 2, if I'm remembering it correctly, because it's been several years since I've seen Jaws 2. But I know in the movie they fire Brody at one point because he freaks out at a beach when he thinks he sees a shark in the water. Hendricks goes to visit Brody afterwards, talking about how offended he is that they fired him and all that.
Yeah, I think there was a deleted scene that showed I don't know what they're called, the town board members, voting on whether to fire him, and
the mayor refuses to vote on it.
Yeah, he does vote, but he votes in favor of keeping Brody. So
yes.
That's a small bit of redemption for him.
Yeah, and that's a scene they probably should have kept.
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, I like Jaws 2 for what it is. Again, it's much more of a B-movie. It's nowhere near as good as the first one, but I think, of the Jaws sequels, it's easily the best one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, by far.
It should be noted that there actually was a novelization of Jaws 2, as well as a comic book adaptation put out by Marvel, neither of which were written by Peter Benchley. Jeremy actually has read the novelization for Jaws 2, and here's him talking about it.
I read Jaws 2 a while back when, again, I was 12. I haven't read it in the time since, but I read it back then, and I remembered liking it.
Do you remember any major differences between the novelization and the film?
Again, that was a long time ago. I think, there were. I remember one part, there was a subplot about a seal pup being abandoned by its mother or something, and being adopted by the Brodies for a short time. Was there a character named Shelley?
There might have been, yeah.
Yeah, he was attacked by the shark and was, I guess, in the hospital and tried to warn Chief Brody by saying, but he could only, he was badly bitten, so he could only say shark, like that. And that's really mostly all I remember. Oh, yeah, and the shark was pregnant. I remember that, too.
And then in 1983, we had Jaws 3, also known as Jaws 3D, which is a pretty bad movie. It's actually written by Richard Matheson, who's one of my favorite writers, but from what I understand, very little of Matheson's original script is actually there on the screen. Jaws 3, as bad as it is, I know it's developed a bit of a cult following over the years, but what do you think of that one?
It's been a long time since I've seen the movie in its entirety, and it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
But I can still watch it. It has a little entertainment value. The special effects just look, for the most part, terrible.
Like that end scene when the shark's approaching them and
God.
It breaks through the glass.
That shot is infamously bad. Not only that, there's also a shot of the shark where it almost looks like a hand puppet. Going in and out.
Yeah.
It's awful.
And then the movie ends with a still shot of a dolphin coming out of the water. It's one of the stupidest things on the planet. Yeah, it's not a good movie at all. It's so tonally different from the first two movies, and I know what the two main characters are Brody's sons from the first two movies, but they almost feel like the movie almost feels like it's a separate continuity.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It doesn't feel like a true sequel. It's just... Not to mention, there's a point where the shark kind of almost feels like it's been lazily done. Like I mentioned before with the looking like a hand puppet and all that. It's just... There's a scene where they're all in those tubes in, I guess, the lagoon part of the park or whatever it's called. Yeah. And the shark's just sitting there looking at them. It's like... What the hell are you doing with the shark? Have it do something.
And then in 1987, we had Jaws the Revenge, which is way worse than Jaws 3. Jaws the Revenge is one of the worst fucking movies ever made, in my opinion. But what makes it kind of hilarious is it's so ridiculous, yet they take it so dead serious. Like, the film is played almost like serious drama, yet literally the shark in the movie, they go outright supernatural with Jaws the Revenge. And yeah, there was sort of a subtle hint of the supernatural in the book, but that was more just how the characters were perceiving it, whereas in the movie, Ellen Brody legitimately has a psychic connection to the shark, and I think they're kind of implying that it's the same shark from the first one, but the ghost of the shark come back. Like, it's as stupid as it sounds.
It really is. I mean, I don't know about it being the shark from the first one, but it's, I considered it just another shark that found out what happened to all his shark buddies and now is out for revenge against the Brody family for killing off all his friends. And I'm like...
But again, Ellen Brody, she has some psychic connection to the shark.
The shark is out for revenge. Oh, damn those Brodies. I'm gonna get them. I mean, it's so ridiculous. It's too ridiculous for words.
Now, because there are two endings to the film. In the TV version, it ends where Ellen Brody drives the boat into the shark and, like, the thing at the end of the boat impales the shark. But then in the theatrical cut, she does that and it explodes!
Well, to be fair, there actually has been a suggested logical reason for that. Because when you see before Jake had put that gizmo thing in the shark, that's where apparently the bow of the boat hit, and that's what caused it to explode. But it's still ridiculous.
It's so bad. We should mention that Michael Caine is in the movie.
Oh yeah, they actually got him to agree to appear in this atrocious crap.
Yeah, I think he said something about, like, it's a free vacation or something.
Yeah,
or a paid vacation.
Yeah, he did. This was one of his notorious paycheck pictures, one that he only did solely for the money. And he said, I've never seen Jaws the Revenge, but by all accounts, it's terrible. But I have seen the house that it built, and it's fantastic.
Yeah, and then you had Mario Van Peebles' character, who we clearly see get bitten in half by the shark. And then, like, at the very end, he's like, yeah, man, I'm bleeding here, man. And he only has a little scratch on it.
Well, that's actually in the theatrical version, because test audiences, I think, didn't like that he died, so they reshot that ending to where he lived. But if you see the movie on TV, I think they keep the original ending and he's dead. This movie is not, as Roger Ebert put it, Jaws the Revenge isn't only a bad movie, it's also a stupid and incompetent one. I mean, how the hell does Ellen Brody have flashbacks to events she wasn't even there to see?
Well, again, if this is supernatural, clearly Ellen's psychic, so she has some psychic connection that she saw her husband killing the shark in the original film.
Yeah, also, it should be noted that Roy Scheider was offered a cameo role in this movie, and had he accepted, it would have been him who was eaten by the shark at the beginning rather than Sean, and I am just so thankful that he turned it down, because to see Chief Brody getting eaten by a shark right at the beginning would have been so disgraceful to the character.
Yeah.
Oh, God, it's so bad.
I mean, Lance Guest, I think, was alright in it.
Yeah, he's alright. I actually met him, too, and I asked him what working with the shark was like, and he said, well, working with the shark was an oxymoron, because that thing never worked.
Yeah, and unlike the original Jaws, where they wait till towards the end to really show you the shark, you see the shark full frontal, almost from the beginning, and it looks awful.
Oh, it does. It looks so rubbery and fake.
Yeah.
Although I will say something, the music in the movie is still good. It's still pretty haunting at times.
Okay.
That's probably the only good thing I can say about the movie.
Alright.
Is the musical score. It's still pretty good, but that's it. That's literally all the good things I can say about it.
And Jaws the Revenge also had a novelization written by the same person who wrote the novelization for Jaws 2, whose name escapes me at the moment. And what about the novelization of Jaws the Revenge?
I haven't read that, but I have read about it, and apparently it involves a subplot that was completely cut from the movie. A voodoo priestess was controlling the shark because apparently Michael Brody had angered him. It was like a vendetta against the Brody family, so he was controlling the shark to...
Or you mean she, because you said a priestess.
Oh no, I think it was a priest.
Okay.
So he was controlling the shark to kill the Brody family out of anger, or Michael apparently disbelieving his powers or something like that.
Would have made about as much sense as everything else in that movie.
Yeah, and the shark... Like, I think there are some parts that are told from the shark's point of view. It doesn't even realize why it's doing the things it's doing. Like, it's just a tool. And then there's also a scene where little Thea, the girl, is going out at night, about to go into the water. She's in a trance, and the shark's lying in wait, which actually could have been pretty scary if they'd used it for the movie, but unfortunately they didn't.
Now, I do want to bring this up, there was a movie called Jaws 5, Cruel Jaws. It's not officially a sequel to Jaws. It was actually an Italian ripoff of Jaws. It came out in the mid-90s. It was directed by Bruno Mattei, who's a notorious Italian filmmaker. And the official title is Cruel Jaws, but some markets title it Jaws 5. That one is also pretty bad, but it's also kind of fun as well. Have you seen Jaws 5, Cruel Jaws?
I have not seen it.
I have it, if you ever want to borrow it. Yeah, it's not very good, but I would still rather watch that than Jaws the Revenge. Now, besides spawning a series of sequels, Jaws has also had multiple rip-offs and cash-ins, like... Shortly after Jaws, there was just a slew of killer animal movies, and to be fair, there were killer animal movies even before Jaws, but like, after Jaws, there were just so many, from Grizzly to Day of the Animals to Orca. There's a movie called Mako, The Jaws of Death, which is actually a pretty interesting film. It's about a guy who has like a psychic connection with sharks. It's almost like Jaws meets Willard in a way. There was also the movie The Last Shark, the Italian film, which was such a ripoff of Jaws that Universal actually sued the makers of that movie because of it, and for years that film wasn't even available in the United States. You've seen that one, right? The Last Shark. It's also known as Great White.
I've seen, like, pieces of it.
There was Joe Dante's Piranha, which was made as sort of a parody on Jaws, but Piranha is also really good.
Yeah, I love that movie, and I love the 2010 remake.
Yeah, the 2010 remake also has an interesting Jaws reference in the fact that Richard Dreyfuss is right in the beginning of the film.
Richard Dreyfuss has actually said, yeah, it's Matt Hooper, but, I don't think it is. The character's name is listed as Matt Boyd.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to think of his character in Piranha 2010 as actually being Matt Hooper, because it's like, considering he gets eaten by piranhas in the beginning, it's like, is that really the fate we want Matt Hooper to have, you know?
I agree. I remember seeing a long time ago this late 70s movie called Tintorea about a killer tiger shark.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that one. There was also a 70s film called Tentacles, which was clearly sort of a cash-in on Jaws. Yeah. And there's no way we're going to be able to touch on every single Jaws ripoff out there. I mean, there's just so many. There's so much stuff out there that would not exist if not for the book and the movie Jaws. I mean, the Sharknado movies, movies like 47 Meters Down, The Shallows, would not exist if not for Jaws. You also have stuff like Deep Blue Sea and the Shark Attack movies, which clearly owe a lot to Jaws. And even stuff like Guyan Smith's Night of the Crabs, or Steve Alton's novel Meg, or its sequels, or its 2018 film adaptation, probably would not exist if not for Peter Benchley's Jaws and Steven Spielberg's film adaptation of Jaws. You mentioned the Jersey Shore shark attacks from 1916. There was actually a made-for-TV movie called 12 Days of Terror that was based on those events. Unless I'm thinking of a different movie made about the same events, the movie that I saw, I think it was this one, 12 Days of Terror, literally was a remake of Jaws, but set in the early 20th century.
Well, it was covering the 1916 attacks.
Yeah, but there were so many similarities, even at the end, with 3 guys going out on a boat to hunt the shark or something.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I saw it, and I remember liking it.
There was also a 1976 porno film called Gums, which was a direct parody of Jaws, only it was about a killer mermaid, which, from what I understand, would kill men by biting their junk off. And let's not forget all the different parodies of Jaws throughout pop culture, like on Saturday Night Live, you had Land Shark. Steven Spielberg even spoofed Jaws in one of his own movies, 1941, where the same actress who played Chrissy Watkins goes skinny dipping in a scene, and instead of a shark coming up to eat her, a Japanese submarine comes up and she gets stuck naked on, I guess that's the crow's nest of the submarine. I'm not really sure what you would call that. Jaws has also been spoofed on kids shows like SpongeBob. And in Disney Pixar's Finding Nemo, you had the shark Bruce, which was a direct reference to Jaws, because on the set of the movie Jaws, they called the animatronic shark that they used Bruce. Jaws has also had an influence on films that you would never think in a million years were actually inspired by Jaws. For example, there's a 1977 Japanese film called House, which is about a haunted house that eats its inhabitants, but believe it or not, Toho, the company that made that movie, asked the director to give them a movie like Jaws, so instead of giving them a movie about a killer shark, he gave them a movie about a killer house. Jaws has also clearly had an influence on Kevin Smith. For example, in Kevin Smith's first movie, Clerks, there's a scene where Randall is quoting Jaws while he has a chip in this thing of salsa, and he's moving it around like a shark fin. That scene was also recreated recently in Clerks 3. And then in Mallrats, the 2 main characters are named Brody and Quint, a direct reference to Jaws. And in Chase and Amy, there's a scene where 2 of the characters are comparing sexual scars, which is a direct homage to the scene from Jaws where Quint and Hooper are comparing scars. And for years, Kevin Smith has been talking about doing a parody of Jaws called Moose Jaws. In Gareth Edwards' 2014 reboot of Godzilla, the main characters are a family called the Parodies, which is obviously a reference to both the book and the movie Jaws, and I think Gareth Edwards has said that, besides other Godzilla movies, Jaws is the film that had the biggest influence on his Godzilla movie. You could even see the influence of Jaws in something like Jordan Peele's recent movie, Nope. So yeah, that was our review of Peter Benchley's Jaws, and catch you next time.